Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pivot Points DFS. I am your host, Keith Cork, and I am here to talk to you about NFL Week 4 coming up. We're already a month into this, guys, almost. At the end of this, we will be a month into the NFL season. This show is presented by FanDuel and on the Believe Network, also part of the Old Man Sports Squad network as well. Old Man Squad Sports Network, sorry, misspoke there. But yeah, I'm excited, guys. I don't feel like, I don't have as strong of a feeling about this week with in terms of like where I know everyone's going to go and where we're going to pivot. But I do think that as I've looked at it more and more, I've got some ideas that are pretty exciting. So, I definitely have a better handle on where people are going to go at this point than I did a couple days ago when I posted my, presentation on Twitter. So I'm excited to get into it. What we're going to start with here is we are going to start with a review of week 3, of course. We always want to take a look at what has happened, what the trends are across the field in general, so that we know where to adjust how we're playing and, different things we might need to do. So we are going to take a look at this, and it is going to be a weekly thing. Again, if you don't want to hear the reviews, want to go straight to what the goods are, what are the good top plays for week 4, go ahead and fast forward about 20 minutes or so. It's okay. I won't tell anybody. But I do think this is a helpful exercise. So, again, we are on YouTube, so please make sure you check it out there where you can. But otherwise, we'll take a look here, and I will walk you guys through it as well on the podcast. I'll just talk you through it. But week 3 was, again, another successful week for me. Definitely got lucky in some places, for sure. And we'll talk about that. But unlucky in others. But all in all, it was a good week. These are the top lineups here. For the SPY, we had a New England Patriots stack with May and Hunter Henry, of course, going off against Metcalf as the bring back. And we also had Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Ricky Pearsall, Roma Dunze, Kenneth Walker, and the Vikings defense. Now, I had every single one of these plays except for Hunter Henry and the Vikings defense were in my player pool. So, a few pieces short there. I did have a Saints or Saints. Wow. I did have a Patriots stack, but I had said that Diggs was probably a better option. He's going to be a top receiver for May. I definitely did not predict a Hunter Henry explosion, but that's what happened. And so that lineup scored 200.22 points, which I believe is actually less than last week's top lineup in that contest. On the other side, for the screen pass, 219.72 was the score there, which I think is comparable, if not better than last week's contest. It had as we all predicted, the Bears Cowboys game was gonna go off. This had a Bears stack, but no Cowboys bring back, which turned out to be the correct call there, because there was no. The Cowboys they scored 2 touchdowns, which, is kind of what we wanted to happen. We'll talk about it in a minute here, but that's kind of what we wanted to happen. But they had Caleb Williams stacked with Roma Dunze, which was fine. Caleb Williams obviously went off. Dunze, not so much, but he did catch the touchdown. Almost had 2. He had that one that he almost caught, which he didn't, unfortunately. It would have been a better day. It would have been better for me as well, but it is what it is. Bijan Robinson was the running back there as well, Jonathan Taylor. So those are the 2 running backs you kind of had to have to win one of these things last week. Pearsall again. I said Dunze already. Trey Tucker, which I never would have in my life gotten to. He was 0.4% owned. Never in my life would I have asked to go with Trey Tucker, but someone lucked out. He was 3.4K. Maybe he was the last guy in for the lineup. I don't know. But obviously he went off, had 3 touchdowns. Trey McBride and Jordan Mason, which we were all over as well. And then the Colts defense. So interesting top lineups there and interesting stacks. We had the right calls. We had the right games outlined and circled. It just didn't turn out we had the right pieces. So here's the chalk, though. Here's the people that everyone was rostering last week. Dak Prescott for the QBs. Dak Prescott, Marcus Mariota, Caleb Williams, and Carson Wentz were the top 4 QBs in ownership. Everyone else was kind of negligible, honestly. But we had pretty, in terms of the ownership on quarterbacks, this was the most steep week probably. Most weeks are pretty flat for QB. But as we predicted, right, Caleb Williams and Dak Prescott were getting almost all the ownership, right? So we wanted to go a different direction there, which we did in our lineups. Marcus Mariota was one of our pivots, so glad to see him there as well, but he was pretty highly owned. For the running backs, Kenneth Walker, which, I know last week and this week as well, I am recording in the middle of the day. Unfortunately, my wife works again tonight for Friday. I'm going to try to record at nights when I can. but when she does work, I have to record earlier in the day. So that Kenneth Walker, the Zach Charbonnet being out news dropped after the show was over, or maybe it was during the show. So I didn't have Kenneth Walker circled necessarily. He didn't really go off, but he luckily fell into the ends of a couple times for people. But he was the highest owned running back on the slate by a pretty good margin, almost 50% owned. So it's kind of crazy. Jordan Mason, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, and Jonathan Taylor, and then Javonte Williams and Saquon Barkley were the top running backs. Those were all double-digit owned running backs on this slate for week 3. Wide receivers, we had Roma Dunze, as we could have guessed, CeeDee Lamb. Sucks to get a goose egg there, and 42% of people had him. That was the big pivot for us, right? And that's why we won. So this is pivot point DFS. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find these pivot points. Got extremely lucky there, of course. We'll talk about it a little bit more here, but he has 0 points and 42% owned, so that's pretty good for us. Keenan Allen, Puka Nacua, DJ Moore, Jackson Smith, Njigba, Ricky Pearsall, George Pickens, and Justin Jefferson were all the top owned wide receivers. For the tight ends, we had Juwan Johnson, Jake Ferguson, Trey McBride, and Tyler Warren. A little bit surprised about Jake Ferguson, but I did call that. I didn't expect him to be quite that high. We had pretty steep ownership on the tight ends as well compared to other weeks. So kind of interesting. The top performers in each position, we had for the QBs, it was Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, Geno Smith, Marcus Mariota, Drake May, Tyrod Taylor. For the running backs, we had Jonathan Taylor, Jordan Mason, Omarion Hampton, and Christian McCaffrey. For the wide receivers, Trey Tucker, Cortland Sutton, Nico Collins, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson, Luther Burden. Interesting. He's 0.06% owned, but very interesting. Ricky Pearsall, Jackson Smith Njigba, and Devontae Smith. Also interesting, 0.66% there. And then Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman Jr., Torrey Horton, also interesting, 0.06%. George Pickens. Those were the wide receivers that were top producers. And then for tight ends, we had Hunter Henry, Jake Ferguson, Hawkinson, and McBride. And so, obviously we keyed in on these tight ends. I think we had that correctly there. We had a lot of wide receivers have really good games. And how did I, break this down? I separated these guys by kind of standard deviations, right? Standard deviations over what typically the most rostered players are doing. Obviously, it's pretty easy on DraftKings. You can just sort by their score, right? Or their score per their dollar amount is what I prefer. And you can see, how they perform there. But those were the top producers there. Just some kind of insights here. 12 out of the top 28 plays had double-digit ownership. So that's 12 out of the 28 plays I just showed you guys or just talked to you guys about the top performers there. They had double-digit ownership. That's compared to 4 out of 20 last week. So that's 43% compared to 20%. So the chalk hit, right? A lot of people were on a lot of these players that had big games. 3 out of 4 of the top-owned QBs hit 3x value. That was compared to 2 out of 5 last week. 3 out of 7 of the top-owned running backs hit 3x value compared to 2 out of 8 last week. 5 out of 9. This is the big one. 5 out of 9 of the top-owned wide receivers hit 3x value. That's compared to 2 out of 10 last week. So obviously, big hits on the receivers there. There were a lot of them that went off. So it was a little bit like, you can kind of throw a dart and hit a wide receiver that had a good game. But which is interesting because we really wanted to make our pivots at running back, and I feel like we did a decent job there. But we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, 1/4 of the top-owned tight ends. 1 out of 4 hit their 3x value, and that was compared to 2 out of 4 last week. Not really a big difference there. Not really anything we can take away from that. 50% of the top 24 picks pictured in the chalk slide there had 3x value. So about half of the top owned plays had 3x value. They did well. They paid off pretty much what they needed to do. And that's compared to 29.6 of 29.6% of 27 picks last week. So Mr. Percentage mark there. Sorry about that, guys. 29.6% of last week compared to 50% this week. So more chalk went off this week than did last week. We had more concentrated ownership and a higher rate of top picks returning value. Just all in all, that's the big takeaway from all of this, right? More concentrated ownership, especially at tight end and quarterback, but I would say, pretty much all around. And we had top picks returning their value more often. So it was a big week. Not exactly what we were looking for, but some good things did happen. We got lucky in some ways, unlucky in others. Here are my chalk calls. Dak Prescott, yep. Caleb Williams, Carson Wentz. I called all those guys being chalk. I did not think Marcus Mariota would be chalk, but he did end up being chalk. He was my pivot play, but it is what it is. Jordan Mason, yep. Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Javonte Williams. All of those guys were for sure chalk in the running back category. For the wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb, Roma Dunze, Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Keenan Allen. Correct on all of those. Those were all chalk plays as well. And then I said Jake Ferguson, Juwan Johnson, and Trey McBride would be chalk plays for the tight end position. Again, I didn't expect Jake Ferguson to be so highly owned because people were so in on CeeDee Lamb, Pickens, Javonte. So I didn't think he would be like, I think he was something like 14% owned in the SPY. So, and about the same in the screen pass as well. So I didn't expect such high ownership for Ferguson, but he did end up being definitely one of the top 4 high owned, plays there. And I was right about that. So 100% of the calls there, of my chalk calls were correct. Mm-hmm. Can't beat that, right? My top plays, personally, who was I playing in, 4 out of 5 of my lineups. I had 6 lineups, so we'll say, but 80% of my lineups or so. Saquon Barkley, he was 10.6% owned, so I like the leverage there for sure, because as you saw with those running backs, they were pretty highly owned, right? We had a couple of running backs with 40+% ownership. I didn't play Kenneth Walker, so I had kind of a pivot off of him to a higher price there. But unfortunately, Saquon had a terrible game. 1.2x value, 9.5 fantasy points, 7.8K was his salary. So we targeted that game, the Eagles and the Rams, and it turned out to be a really good game to target. Unfortunately, it turned out to go the other way, right? It wasn't the run game that went off against the Rams. It was unfortunately the pass game. Once the Eagles were down at halftime, they had to really throw the rock in the second half. And so A.J. Brown had a big game, which helped me in one lineup, as you'll see. But all in all, unfortunately, Saquon was not a good call there. Jonathan Taylor was my other play, 26.8% owned. So he was chalk, but he returned 5x value. So I'm happy with that, even with the ownership. Totally worth it. 35.8 was his fantasy points. 7.2K was his salary. Jordan Mason, 41.9% owned. Again, it's chalk, but it's basically 5x, 4.9x for him, 26.6 fantasy points and 5.4K. Again, that price point was just too attractive to let up. It was the right call. If you had him, you probably had a really good chance to hit the cash line. If you had Jonathan Taylor and Jordan Mason. Unfortunately for me, I did have Saquon Barkley in most of my lineups as well, so that's what kind of sunk me. Puka Nacua was my other call there, 15.4% owned, which is too low. It's going to be probably twice that this week. But that was pretty low there. 3.4x value, 25.8 fantasy points, 7.7K. Great. I love it. No touchdown. And once that touchdown does hit, it's going to go great. So again, he's going to be chalky again this week. But if he scores a touchdown and Devontae Adams doesn't, it's going to be 4x value, right? His salary did jump a little bit, but I still think he's a good play. Juwan Johnson was 23.2% owned. So he was the top 10 in the slate. He had 2.8x value. 11.1 fantasy points and 3.9K was his salary. So, all of those guys did well, except for Saquon Barkley. Not too bad. So yeah, Saquon crapped the bed. Jonathan Taylor was excellent. Jordan Mason, excellent. Puka Nacua was fun. It was great. Juwan Johnson was fine. He didn't sink you. It was really no. He almost got 3x value. So no hurt, no harm, no foul. 3.9K is a really nice salary to be able to fit other options into our lineup. So key pivots I had touted that I ended up rostering myself. We had Marcus Mariota, which I called a pivot. He was 15.9% owned, so not quite a pivot. He did hit 5.3x value, though. 21.28 fantasy points, 4K salary. It was a 4K salary that made him attractive. And absolutely, he did a great job. Drake May was the other one, 5.4% owned. Great pivot there, 4x value, 21.2 fantasy points, 5.3K. On another slate where we don't have Marcus Mariota and Carson Wentz and things like that, he probably ends up being more of a difference maker for you. But being able to stack him was what won at least one of the one of the contests I saw. And I think actually, if I look this up, I think the Millie Maker actually had that stacked in the lineup as well. See if I can scroll here to where that is. No, it didn't. Okay, it was a Geno Smith a Geno Smith roster, but that's okay. Either way, still a very good pivot there, so don't mind that at all. Ricky Pearsall, I called a pivot. He was 13.9% owned, so honestly, he was chalk. But 4.1x value, he was in the winning lineups I showed you both in my contest, 22.7 fantasy points, 5.5K. DK Metcalf, I said was a decent pivot, 7.2% owned. Yep, great pivot there, 2.1x value, unfortunately, 12.2 fantasy points, 5.7K salary. Not great, but not bad, didn't sink you. And then my big loss here in my key pivots was Stephon Diggs. He was 1.8% owned, so leverage there for sure, but only 1.1x value, 5.3 fantasy points. He had a decent week 1, 4.8K salary. He had a decent week 1, but unfortunately, weeks 2 and 3 have left a lot to be desired. His snap count is rising, which is what led me to think, this is the guy that people aren't going to be on, that may go off. I still think the logic is sound there, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like the target share is there for him at this point. So probably going to be off Diggs until further notice, but I do still expect him to eventually emerge as the wide receiver 1 over there. So other notes here, the min cash line for the SPY was 150.82 versus 147.54 last week. So it did go up again for the third week in a row. And then it was 122.02 in week 1. And then the screen pass is 152.44 versus 149.7 last week. So again, another climb for a third week in a row is 122.92 in week 1. So, I was 100% identifying chalk this past week, but those lines, the cash lines are climbing, right? I mean, cash lines are climbing. In general, the winning lineup, scores are climbing as well. But it's going to go week to week, right? I think at this point, we've kind of seen what peak looks like. We might get a higher score, but it's not like, theory that they're climbing because we are better identifying the chalk and better at rostering the right players. It has a limitation, right? So I think we've kind of reached that where it's like, okay, now we all kind of know where people stand in their on their respectful teams, aside from, some situations where there's injuries and stuff like that. But in general, there's other things that are affecting the top scores more so than that. Okay. I had the right angle, but I misidentified a few chalky plays. So Pearsall and Kenneth Walker ended up being chalky, and I didn't have those really. Again, Kenneth Walker happened after I dropped off the podcast. I'm really not upset that I faded him because he didn't have a great game. He ended up finding the end zone twice. He is the RB1 there in Seattle for sure. And he did have a nice salary, but I was just so in on the plays I had already that I didn't see any need to try to just jam him into the lineups. I was happy with my lineups. I let them ride. And, if he doesn't get that second touchdown, it ends up being a bigger day for me. If Saquon Barkley has a bigger day, it ends up being a bigger day for me. So, it is what it is. Sack the right game once again, but the wrong pieces. I had Barkley over Brown in most cases. Like I said, if Barkley even just finds the end zone, it's probably a much better day for me. But that's what happened. But we did have the CeeDee Lamb injury on the other side, and that helped me tremendously. If that doesn't happen, I probably don't catch anything, right? So, take the good with the bad. All in all, variance happens, things happen, events happen. You can't control it. We need everything to go right to be able to, hit that number 1 spot and take down that big prize. We had the chance here. We had the right reads, and it just didn't happen. Certain things did not happen that we need to happen, and other things did happen that weren't on our radar or we didn't want to have happen. So that's the game, right? That's the DFS game, and we trudge on. So more concentrated ownership and better results. This game is overall getting sharper, but again, I don't think that's the end all be all for the top scores. So it's really not something we need to be focusing on too much going forward. I think at this point, everyone's a lot sharper, and that's going to affect scores all around. But the top scores are more affected by, things that happen on the field. They're not affected by us being able to identify stuff better, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. My performance. So in the SPY, I went with a Marcus Mariota, naked, I believe, right? Yep, naked. Which I said, totally fine to do that. He did have a rushing touchdown. I was hoping for 2. He had 1. He had 1 passing touchdown as well, a fumble, unfortunately. But all in all, I'm happy with that for sure. Saquon Barkley, like I said, busted out. Jordan Mason, great play. Jackson Smith-Njigba was another play that I said, I'd be on. And he's just getting such a massive target share, 20.6. Mike Evans, unfortunately, he did score, which was fortunate. Unfortunately, he left with an injury. It is what it is. 13.3 points from him. Devontae Adams was a guy that I didn't really talk about a lot on the podcast, but he is getting most of the targets within, in the opponents in the red zone, right? When they get to the red zone, Devontae Adams, it's his time to shine. He did get a receiving touchdown there. Only had 3 receptions, not too many targets, but less of a volume guy and more of a big hit guy with the TD volume, which we'll talk about in this slate for as well. But he is a guy, but he was a good play here on this slate. Juwan Johnson, I said he's a fine play. Jonathan Taylor, already talked about him. And the Bengals defense really let me down against Minnesota. Obviously, I wasn't expecting Minnesota to go off. In a lot of ways, I'm lucky there as well because Minnesota scored 48 points, but Carson Wentz did not go off, who I faded. So lucky there as well. But yeah, I could have went with a different defense for sure and gotten a few more points. On the screen pass, I went with the Jalen Hurts. This is my favorite stack of the day. Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, of course, was the stack there. And then I ended up bringing it back with Puka Nacua, who I spoke about on the pod and said was one of my plays for sure. And all those guys went off. Jonathan Taylor went off. Jordan Mason went off. Rome Odunze I had in this lineup. He was the last guy in. I know I said I wasn't going to stack that Bears Dallas game, but I think getting one-offs, as I said in that podcast, go back and listen. One-offs are totally fine. I was more interested in the one-offs that were going to be lesser owned. But when it came down to the last player in my lineup and I had 5.3K remaining, and that was exactly his salary, I said, why the heck not? He's the wide receiver 1 for this Bears team. This game's predicted to be high scoring. I did want to fade the stacks, but I didn't necessarily want to fade every single piece of it. So that was what I landed on there. Harold Fannin Jr., again, I just kind of landed on him. I needed a few more $100 to pay up for, I believe it was probably Rome Odunze, because I didn't like the options I had at 50 at 5,000. So I went with him. He didn't do anything, honestly. Jaylen Warren was the other one running back I had in there. Had a decent game, 13.1 points. He didn't get the end zone, unfortunately. Otherwise, that would have been a lot nicer for me. And then my biggest call of the day, maybe for the defense, definitely for the defense, but one of my biggest calls for the day was the Browns defense. There've been quite a few lineups, and they wound up really coming through for me, right? So, 220 is what I have showing here as my winnings for the day across these two lineups. Altogether, I end up winning 280. So it was plus 135 for week 3. So overall, I am $80 up. Hey, you know what? I'll take it. Not going to complain. Got lucky here for sure. In more ways than one. Got unlucky too in more ways than one as well. So, I'm not too worried about it. I think so far my reads have been, good. I feel like it's a lost opportunity though, right? I feel like I really had a chance to smash this thing and really come away with like a big win, and it just didn't happen. But that's how it goes. We're not playing a high percentage game. We're playing a long game where we're hoping to hit, a low probability thing once, and that'll set us up for the rest of the season. So we go onwards and upwards. Let's talk about week 4 and what we've got coming up here. For the week 4 plays here, I do think, and you gotta excuse me here, guys. I got a little bit of a cold for the last week. Actually, a really bad cold. But yeah, we've got an interesting slate here. Let me see if I can share my screen and not screw up like I did last week. I promise I'm trying to get better with this. I just I'm old, I guess. I don't know, man. You guys tell me. But let's go ahead and pull up that slate. There it is. Perfect. Make sure we're on the screen. Okay. Nope, we're not. See? There it is. I'm getting better. I'm getting wiser. Let's talk about week 4 though. So the chalk plays I see here, especially at the QB, seems pretty easy for me to identify the QB. I think it's going to be Geno Smith. The Raiders are taking on the Bears, and just like last week, we saw the Cowboys, we saw the ownership there. I think there's going to be less ownership on Geno. He's 5.4K. Less ownership on Geno than there was on Dak last week for sure. It was like something like 18% last week for Dak. But for this week, probably double digits for Geno. I think he's going to be the top owned QB on the slate. That secondary of the Bears has not gotten any better. The run defense has also deteriorated to the point where I'll talk about it in a second here. But I think, you can look at Genty for sure. But pairing Geno Smith with Trey Tucker is probably going to be on the plate of a lot of people, right? I think that's going to happen. I think people are going to, we try to stay away from recency bias and just plug in what happened last week. And I think that's a losing proposition most weeks. But Trey Tucker is still just 4,200. And, you really can't argue with the results so far. He's had several, he's had a couple of good games. He's had 13.4 DK points in week 1 and 43.9, of course, in week 3. He did have a dud in week 2, 4.9, but they did just score 9 points, right? And they're going to score more than 9 points here against the Bears. So everything points to, Trey Tucker probably needs to be someone in your player pool, especially in cash. I'm not obviously going for it. I just think I'd rather get the edge on some ownership elsewhere. I don't hate it as much as I don't want to fade it as hard as I faded the Dak play and the CeeDee Lamb play, just because I don't think the ownership is going to be so crazy high. So I think that there could potentially be an edge there still. So I'm not completely out on it, but I'm not super in on it. The other wide receiver, or the other QB, I'm sorry, that I think is going to be pretty heavily owned here because he's coming off of really 2 solid weeks, is Drake May. And he's 5.5K. I'm not fading him, but as you can see, 26.3 DK points in week 2, 21.2 in week 3. I do think that that's going to be that's an interesting play. I'm not fading him outright. He is up against Carolina. That's the other reason people are going to be into him, because Carolina is just a crappy defense overall. Not super like going out of my way to get to him. I think I probably will entertain a stack with him and see how that plays out. But he's not a guy that I'm super duper like targeting or anything like that. For the running backs, and this is my big play for the week, guys. This is my big pivot. For the running backs, we have to obviously look at Omarion Hampton. No Najee Harris. They've got Haskins. They've got Vidal. They've got some options there. But all in all, pretty underwhelming, right? They don't have any really great options. And we are, and I think I think Omarion Hampton's going to be super highly owned. Omarion Hampton, he's going to be very highly owned because obviously Najee Harris had a season-ending injury, unfortunately. Sorry to hear for him. But people think he's going to, Omarion Hampton's going to have this big 3-down role. And that may be the case. I think the probability is yes. I think the probability is that's going to be his role. And at 5.9K, I'm not going to outright fade him. I'm going to have a share or two. But I am mostly fading him because I think the probability of that happening is lower than the field thinks it is. We saw it last year with Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh. With Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, they want to have a split backfield. I mean, what are the options behind Omarion Hampton? Haskins, Vidal. They're not very enticing, right? But in addition to that, this season, we saw the Chargers be willing to unleash Justin Herbert. Let him throw the ball down the field. Herbert looks healthy. He had 2 broken fingers last year, right? One on his non-throwing hand, and then eventually when his season was over, on his throwing hand. But he looks healthy now. Keenan Allen's back, and Herbert's having a great time throwing to his friend again. Quentin Johnston's having a fantastic, huge season. Ladd McConkey has yet to go off. He's 6.5K. I'm not going to roster him based on what we've seen so far, but he's going to have a game where he goes off. And we even saw Oronde Gadsden get in on the fun last game. So, given that, I think the probability that Omarion Hampton's going to just have an explosive, 18, 20-point game or more, 25, 30, is lower than the field thinks it is. So that's my pivot. That's the reason I'm going away from Hampton here mostly. And that's my big one for this week. Christian McCaffrey, going to be highly owned as well. He's 8.5K now. I want to fade him, but the price is reasonable now, so his ownership will be lower, right? Before he was just underpriced and he was a good play and people were just plugging him in as just kind of I'm going to go ahead and get this guy. And we haven't seen that ceiling game yet from Christian McCaffrey. And that could very well happen against his Jaguars defense. We haven't seen, great things from this Jaguars defense. So McCaffrey is definitely in play still. even at 8.5K for me, but he is going to be chalky. Cam Scattaboo. Got to talk about Cam, right? Cam Scattaboo. We're not going to have Tyrone Tracy. People are, again, going to like this game here against the Chargers. Yeah, I don't see it, guys. I don't buy the talent. I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe he's going to be a monster 3-down back guy. I just haven't. I mean, I think, he's fun guy to root for. Definitely plays with reckless abandon, which can be scary. There could be an injury around the corner. I don't want to wish that upon anybody, absolutely. But there is Devin Singletary there as well, which you don't want to know. I know people don't want to hear it, but he probably will get some snaps here. And they're going up against the Chargers, which is a really stout defense. So I'm not on Scattaboo. That's a fade for me. Easy fade. James Cook. People are going to be on him as well at the running back position. And yeah, I get it. Obviously positive game script here against the Saints. Buffalo should end up, handling them pretty easily. But that's the other reason to not really love him so much. And there's other running backs that I'm into that are around that price as well, or cheaper or more expensive, that I'm just way more into. And I just don't want to see myself on James Cook. Will he score a touchdown? Probably. But then will he sit the rest of the game when they're up, 24-0 or whatever it is, 35-0? He might. And that's a little bit of a risk that I really just don't think I want to take on here. Is Josh Allen just going to have fun and pass to all of his different weapons and spread the rock around? Is Josh Allen going to have a big game where he runs it in for a couple touchdowns? I don't know. It's hard for me to see this team get up to play a team in the Saints that have just been absolutely terrible. The Saints are pressing the reset button, and justifiably so, because they really needed to with their salary cap situation. But I don't love the ceiling. I don't see the ceiling here. So for me as a GPP player, I'm not on James Cook. Jonathan Taylor, on the other hand, yeah, I can see myself getting to Jonathan Taylor. Interesting game for sure. This Indianapolis and Rams game. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor, he's on the field 90% plus snaps, getting all the plays, getting all the carries. I see no reason to fade Jonathan Taylor outright. If I can get to him at 7,500, I'm totally game for that. So, but I do expect him to have high ownership. Puka Nacua, as I mentioned before, yep, we still need to find the ceiling game here for him, but 7,900, and it's just incredible. 15 targets, 11 targets, 9 targets in the second week, but that was a blowout, 33-19. This is against a pretty good team, the Colts, obviously, right? The Colts have really shown us a lot of grit and a lot of good stuff on the offensive end. So as long as the Rams can stay in this game, or I'm sorry, as long as the Colts can stay in this game, I expect the Rams to win this game, honestly. But as long as the Colts can stay in this game, I do think Nacua is a safe bet for sure. He's going to get double-digit targets. He's probably going to get 100 yards at least catching. Had a touchdown in week 2, but if he can get that 100 yards plus a touchdown, which we haven't really seen yet, then I think we're really cooking with gas. Jacoby Myers. Everyone's going to be on Trey Tucker probably, but I do think Jacoby Myers gets some really decent ownership as well. Despite the big Trey Tucker explosion, most fantasy players, DFS players, are keyed into the fact that Jacoby Myers is the wide receiver 1 on this team. He is playing the Devontae Adams role. He only had 4 targets in the last game. A little surprising. But he had 12 and 10 the games before that, right? The 2 games before that. The Raiders could not get anything going against the Commanders. It was pretty gross to watch. But hopefully Geno Smith and that offense can figure things out, and Jacoby Myers can have a really decent game. Other wide receiver that's going to be all owned all over is Devontae Adams. I already talked about it. It'd be basically, if they get in the red zone, he's the guy that they're going to for those touchdowns. I really do think Puka Nacua gets that touchdown today, or this week, I should say. And so I'm not really on Devontae Adams, but I don't mind getting to him. As you saw on that previous screen, I did get to him in one of my winning lineups. So, I'm not off of him at all. I think he's totally fine. For the tight ends, I expect Hunter Henry, after an explosive game, to really be heavily owned. Especially with Drake May being a heavily owned quarterback, people are going to go back to that. Is it chasing? Yes, it is, but at the same time, he's only 4K, and he had a really decent week 1 as well. So I don't think that the floor is too bad. And we did see the ceiling game last week. I don't think he's going to have that ceiling game again. He had 29 DK points, but he can definitely land in the 10 to 15 range. And I think that's totally reasonable. At 4K, it's really nice. So I don't dislike him. I'm not going out of my way to get him either. Brock Bauer is going to be highly owned as well, just because it's up against the Bears. I still don't think he's 100%. From what I've seen, right? He's going to week by week, he's going to get better and better. And eventually he's going to get to that 100%. He's going to get near it. I'm not ready to pounce just yet, but perhaps next week, depending on what we see, I'm going to watch definitely going to watch this game, of course. And I'm going to watch these snaps closely and see what he looks like. But, just not getting the work that we would imagine from Brock Bowers, really ticking off season long owners, which I get, but he's just not, he's injured, man. So, we gotta wait for him to come back and really look more like himself before I'm ready to go bite the bullet there. Tyler Warren, again, going to be highly owned. He's been highly owned every week. I don't expect that to change in a game that's going to be probably the most targeted, if not one of the most targeted on the slate. Did have a bit of a down week last week, but double digits in the first 2 weeks and still getting the volume that we want to see. So I'm happy to go to Tyler Warren as well. I'm not going to fade him by any means at all. But here are my key pivots here on the slate where I don't think we're going to get super high ownership, but I think they still have an opportunity to go off pretty decently. We are looking at this Giants game. This is one of the ones that I'm looking to stack personally for sure. And I am looking at Jackson Dart. New QB, right? Looked fantastic in the preseason. I know it's just preseason. I get it. This isn't the preseason. This is a real game. It's against a tough defense, but he's only 4,500. He only needs to get us about 15 DK points, right? 14, 15 DK points. I think he can definitely do that. I think he can do that and more. And I think he's going to target his guy, Malik Neighbors, a whole heck of a lot. One of the first things Malik Neighbors said, in the presser about the QB change when he was asked about it was he's going to get one the ball, right? He's going to know how to get one the ball. And I do think that's going to be the game plan here. Obviously 7 targets in week 3, no bueno. Not going to work for us, right? Not going to work for Neighbors owners, not going to work for the Giants. It's just not going to happen. And, of course, Neighbors was getting all the attention by a good defense in the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's again a good defense with the Chargers. So I don't expect like a giant game from Neighbors, but I expected the force the issue. So for that reason, Neighbors and Jackson Dart is a stack that I really do like. And I think there's going to be a concerted effort to get him the ball. So I do want to stack that in at least one of my lineups, probably a couple of them, but we'll see where that ends up. Another guy I like that people aren't necessarily as high on, I kind of spoke on him already, but Ashton Jeanty. People are just low on this guy so far, calling him a bust and whatnot. But Jeanty is an absolute talent. Just watch him, watch him run the ball. He has absolute power, speed, all the tools you need to have those big games. He's just, the Raiders are just having a hard time blocking for him. He's getting contact way too early in his movements and his rushing attempts. So, but they are still giving him the work. 19 carries, 11 carries, 17 carries. Didn't see any targets last week, but he saw 4 the week before in week 2. So he is involved in the passing game, not super duper involved, but he will catch a few passes for you. So I think there's definitely a nice ceiling here for GNT, and he's only 6.2K, and it's against my Bears, who just got tore up by Javonte Williams of all people. So I do think this is actually really good. I think GNT is a guy I want to get to quite a bit. Kyron Williams is another guy that I think people are going to be off of because they're going to be on Jonathan Taylor, and they're going to be on Puka Nacua, and they're going to be on Devontae Adams. So Kyron's just not a guy that's going to have high ownership. I expect probably 5% ownership or less, probably closer to like 3, maybe. So, if the ownership's going to be super low, I mean, this guy's still getting a bulk share of the carries and of the work, right? He's got 20 carries last week, 17, 18, huge amounts of carries. He's still getting a few targets here and there, able to, break off big run plays, big passing plays. I like Kyron Williams a whole heck of a lot. 6.3K is a really nice salary as well. So I think this is a really, really good pivot here. And no one's going to roster him. He's in just as good of a spot as JT in the same game, and it's a run funnel defense. So I think Kyron's really got to be on the menu for you in GPPs for sure. For the wide receivers, I am really into a guy that's probably going to get a decent amount of ownership, but third most expected fantasy points on the season. I don't know. That was before last night's game, so I don't know if that still holds true. But last I looked, it was. And he hasn't realized those points at all because this team is just so god awful. But Chris Olave, 5,100 for him. He's getting so much opportunity. 14 targets last week, 10 catches, 57 yards only. Only 5.7 average on those catches. But he's going to be able to break one time, and you want to be there when he does. He's going to have a big game one of these weeks. Buffalo has not been a good defense so far this season. They've been okay, right? They've been pretty average. They haven't been terrible. They looked pretty bad in week 1. Week 2, they looked a little bit better. Week 3, they looked better, even better. But I do think Olave has the capability of having one of those ceiling games here. I think in GPPs, he's definitely got to be someone you gobble up. Again, I expect him to have pretty high ownership. Of course, a negative game script where they're going to have to throw the ball. It's going to be Olave. It's going to be Juwan Johnson. Those are the guys. It's a really concentrated offense. So, these are safe-ish plays. But Olave has the ceiling that other plays don't because of his salary. Because the salary is so low, his ceiling is lower, right? The ceiling he needs to get to pay off for that salary is lower. So he's a guy I think I like a whole heck of a lot. Leak Neighbors already mentioned Roma Dunze, 6.3K. It's just been 1 week, guys. 1 week, and he's already a forgotten man. Everybody was on Roma Dunze. And look, I mentioned it earlier in this podcast. He had 1 touchdown. He could have had 2. He dropped a pass in the end zone. It was good defense. He got knocked out of his hands, but he was targeted in the end zone by Caleb Williams. This is clearly Caleb Williams' guy. 34.8 DK points in week 2. That's an example of what the ceiling could be. And this Raiders defense is not good either. These are 2 bad defenses. So this is again going to be a heavily stack game. I'm not fading it again as hard as I faded the Dallas Bears game, but I do think that it's a game that I'm not going to go out of my way to stack. If I end up with a stack of this game, it's fine. I don't want to do the Geno Smith stack. I just really don't want to do that. I might do a Bear stack. We'll see. But if I do, it's for sure going to be a Dunze. And he's only 6.3K. Still not a bad salary for a guy that's producing 7.5K wide receiver pretty much on a weekly, right? He's getting all the targets. Let's see. 7 targets last week, but 11 in week 2, 9 in week 1. I expect close to double-digit targets again, right? So, getting all the touchdowns too. That's the main thing. So that's a guy I'm really into that for whatever reason people are just forgetting about. Sterling Shepard, I think for deeper leagues or for a bargain bin type guy, is a guy I would look at heavily as well. We are expecting Baker Mayfield at this point to be back. Actually, let me go ahead and refresh this news here, see if there's any breaking news, see if I can get in on that before I head out of here. Will Disley's going to be out, so you can go to Gadsden a little bit more. Colson Loveland questionable. DeAndre Swift still questionable. I expect him to play. They did this last week as well, so I expect him to play. Mekhi Becton, he's going to be out. Oof. Another reason that I'm not really in on Omarion Hampton. Mekhi Becton, that's a big blow for that offensive line. So, yeah, I'm not super in on Omarion Hampton, honestly. League Neighbor's going to play. That looks like all the new stuff. So nothing really that earth-shattering except for the Mekhi Becton thing, which I do. Again, Hampton, I think the probabilities are on our side there. I think, everyone's going to have him. And if he busts out and he only scores, maybe say he scores 12 DK points. Say he scores 15 DK points. But we roster another guy, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. And he ends up going off for, similar or even lower salary, but the same or more. We're cooking, right? That we're getting the edge there. That's an edge. I think there's a real case you can get an edge. But going back here, talking about this Tampa Bay game, I expect Godwin's probably going to play. Seems like he's trending that way. He's questionable right now, but I think he'll probably suit up. But I don't expect him to get a full, workload. He's not getting all the snaps. I think a lot of people are going to be on Mecca Buka. That price increase really turns me off there, though. He was 6.3. He jumped $500 in his salary. I'm not super in on Mecca just because of that reason. But I think Shepard, he's got a rapport with Baker Mayfield. He's been playing with Baker Mayfield for a long time connection with that guy. No Mike Evans. Like Luka's going to get his. Godwin's still working his way back. It's going to be Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard's going to get more work than people realize. So he's 4K. I like him as a budget option for sure. Another budget option I like is Parker Washington at 3.7K. Look, they're doing the right thing. They're taking Travis Hunter and they're making him a cornerback. So far, his route tree has not stood up to the NFL snuff. So far, it's been underwhelming. This offense definitely needs some work. Obviously, people are all over Trevor Lawrence. I don't think it's entirely on him, but he hasn't been good this season for sure. BTJ obviously has not been good either. But Parker Washington at 3.7K is definitely an interesting budget guy for sure. I think he's a guy you can get to because he is going to be playing, more. He's going to have more opportunity with no Travis Hunter playing as much wide receiver. I don't expect him to take a huge step back from playing wide receiver, Travis Hunter, but I do expect him to take a small step back. De'Ami Brown is also, I think questionable for this game. He's limited, so he's questionable. So if he's out, I like Parker Washington a whole heck of a lot more. But as it stands, I still do like him. Doesn't matter if De'Ami plays or not. Deebo Samuel at 6K. Pretty easy to guess there. No Terry McLaurin. I'm not super in on Deebo, but I think he makes a lot of sense. Just as being the guy. If you want to stack that game, I think he's probably the guy to stack with Mariota. But he's just 6K, not bad. McCaffrey went off in garbage time. I'm not buying in on that. They really have nobody else, right? They have Jalen Lane. I mean, there's nobody here that really stands out. There's Noah Brown's going to be out as well. So it should be concentrated. Either the Falcons roll over them and the Commanders struggle to score because they don't really have a run game either, remember. Or we have Deebo Samuel and Marcus Mariota go off, right? There's a lot of opportunity there for Deebo. So you do have to like him a little bit for sure. But I don't know. I'm leaning more towards the Commanders are just going to get rolled in this game, honestly. And then for tight ends, I like Juwan Johnson again. I do expect him to have lower ownership than last week just because his price jumped 4,200 and they're playing against the Buffalo Bills. But it's a negative game script, and everyone's going to go probably to Olave. He's probably going to have under 10% ownership, close to 10% though. It's not going to be a super duper pivot there, but he's getting tons of targets. He's getting tons of work, and there's no reason for that to change until they change their quarterback situation. Then it might change. We'll have to see. But I do like him. The other tight end I like is Kyle Pitts, 3.6K. Another solid game, another solid showing for him last week. The Falcons just couldn't get anything going. But he had 6 targets, made 4 catches, 39 yards. Still haven't really seen an explosion from him. All he needs is that touchdown to really hit value for us there, right? 3.6K is a really nice salary. His salary actually fell. So I like him again this week. So Kyle Pitts is definitely on my radar. But my top plays, let me give you guys my top plays. These are the guys that I'm going to be stacking in most of my lineups here. And I already talked about him a little bit here, but the first guy I want to stick in here is Justin Herbert. A lot of people are going to be on Jackson Dart in this game. A lot of people are going to be on Josh Allen, Geno Smith. He's going to have a low ownership, and he gets to go up against the Giants defense that has given up quite a few points, right? Just looking at this Giants defense here, they give up 22 to Kansas City, who has nobody. Their leading wide receiver right now is Tyquan Thornton. He gave up 40 points to the Dallas Cowboys, who have a really good offense, no doubt. 21 to the Commanders. So, it's not a great defense. We saw some good games from receivers against this defense. So I think Justin Herbert has that skill to really pop off and to have a big game against this defense. And again, I don't expect them to run away with this game. I expect them to win this game pretty handily. But in order to do that, they're going to have to score points. So it's kind of like why people are playing the Bills. I'm playing the Chargers. I think it's a similar kind of outclassed type of situation. And it's just going to be an easy game for Justin Herbert. I'm stacking him with Quentin Johnston mostly, just because I don't want to stack him with Keenan Allen because of the ownership. So Quentin Johnston has had just as good of a season, if not, well, not better, definitely than Keenan Allen, but he's had just as good of a season almost as Keenan Allen. And you can see right here his body of work, and people are going to be overlooking him as well. I mean, I'm not expecting him to be highly owned either. So I think, stacking him with Justin Herbert makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. The other guy that I'm jamming into all my lineups, I get, Quentin Johnson, again, not a core player or anything like that, but he is a guy that I'm looking to stack with him. And look, again, what if the Chargers just throw the ball? What if they, Mekhi Becton, again, going to be out. What if they decide that they want to throw the ball more than they want to run the ball? Right? Totally possible. We'll see how it's going. Another guy I want to get into all my lineups, and this is another pivot of mine. Boop, boop, boop. It is Quinshon Judkins. Not a great matchup. The Lions are solid against the run. But the other thing we know about the Browns is that they have one of the better, if not the best, defenses in the NFL. And they've played some pretty solid competition, right? They've played the Packers. They've played the Ravens. They played the Bengals, who were supposed to have, at that time, they had Burrow, and they're supposed to have an explosive offense. And they're holding these teams to 17 points or less, 3 straight weeks. My guess is the Browns want to play time of possession, right? They want to control the football. They want to control the clock. That's the smartest thing to do when you have Joe Flacco as your QB. And this receiving core, decent, not bad, not terrible, but it's a little underwhelming, right? It's like on the bad side of decent. But Jerry Jeudy, I'm really not impressed with what I've seen with him so far. Tillman is decent, but outside of that, who do they have, right? And they throw their tight ends quite a bit, and they basically treat Fannin as a extra wide receiver, and they have Njoku in there. So they have some weapons, but it looked to me like Judkins was the top weapon last week. He's the one that won them the game, scored the touchdown, yes, but he's the one that has been growing in his role, for 2 weeks now, and 18 carries, and we presume he's not even at his full workload at this point, right? I expect something close to that as well. Again, right? 17, 18 carries. I'm hoping for 80 plus yards. I'm hoping for a touchdown. He was involved in the passing game in both weeks. 3 targets in week 2. Very nice. Of course, they were playing from behind in that game, but I digress. I mean, they're not playing Dylan Sampson. Jerome Ford's getting some work, but he's getting less and less. No rushing attempts last week. So, Quinshon Judkins, is a play. I'm going to have him in all my lineups. He's the obvious pivot off of Omarion Hampton for me. So I absolutely want him. And, Travion Henderson was a good play until we just got the news before I came on that they're not going to decrease Najee's workload, is what the coach said, Coach Rabel. So if that's the case, then, Henderson's pretty much off the board. He's a clear pivot off those guys. I love it. I love Quinshon. Malik Neighbors. Already talked about him. Gonna force him to rock. I'm expecting big things from Malik Neighbors this week. I want at least a touchdown. I want 100 yards. I think this is going to be a competitive game. Actually, let me take a look here. I haven't looked at that recently, but last I looked, there wasn't really a lot to take away. Yeah, 74% of the bets are on the Chargers and 87% of the money. So things are going towards the Chargers for sure. But I think it's going to be more competitive than the general public thinks it's going to be. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think Malik Neighbors is a nice play here. And then the other guy I'm all over, which I didn't talk about yet, is Zach Ertz. Where is he? There he is. Zach Ertz at my tight end spot. 4,100. And, I already talked about, Deebo Samuel's going to get a whole bunch of targets, right? The next guy that's logically going to get targets is going to be Zach Ertz. And we saw, he does have some chemistry with Marcus Mariota. We saw that last week. We had 3 targets, 38 yards. Didn't score a touchdown. I believe he didn't get a target in the end zone, but still, I do think he can get an end zone target. I do think that this team can score on the Hawks. Can score on the Falcons. I do think that this team can score on the Falcons, who had an absolutely miserable week last week. So, Yeah, I think Zach Ertz is definitely a plug and play for me. I don't see any reason not to. If we look at the other tight ends on the slate, and I went over some of the ones that I do like, but even the ones that I like, in terms of cost per dollar and production per dollar, I just don't think that there's many that are better. Around him, we've got Juwan Johnson's $100 more, but I think that they have similar floors given the situation. And Hunter Henry's 200 less, probably similar floors as well. So the ownership angle gives me the go ahead and get Zach Ertz in all my lineups. The guys or the games that I expect to be stacked the most. I expect everyone to be all over the Colts and Rams. That's going to be a popular game for sure. Let me take a look here. As of right now, the Colts and Rams have a 3.5 point spread, and it's a 58% to 42% people on Colts versus people on Rams in terms of number of bets, percentage of bets. So people do expect that to be a competitive game. I'm worried about that Colts offense, and when will they be exposed? When will Daniel Jones be exposed? Because I just can't believe I'm still not fully bought in on that. Right, aside from Jonathan Taylor, I'm not super duper convinced that they are a elite offense. Right, and they've only punted once on the season, which is absolutely insane. At some point, regression has to hit. It just does. I'm sorry. That's just how data works. That's how real life works. So I'm worried about it. I am. We'll see how that goes. Maybe I'm a fool for that, but we'll see. The other game, of course, that's going to be popular is the Chicago and Las Vegas game. And, you can't blame people. I think it is two pretty bad defenses and the Raiders weren't good offensively the last couple of weeks, but they were good in week 1 for sure. And they have that ability, and obviously Geno Smith is a capable quarterback. I saw some good things from the Bears defense last week, of course. So, I'm not in love with stacking this game, but I'm not super against it either. I think it's fine. My favorite games to stack, though, that I think a lot of people are going to be off of, if you haven't guessed already, of course, is the Chargers and the Giants. Already talked about that game ad nauseum. The other game, though, that I would like to stack that I just think people are overlooking is the Washington and Atlanta game. It's very easy to call who's going to be producing on the Washington side, as I said. You got Debo, you got Ertz, and you've got Mariota. I'm not going to go into anyone else outside of that, honestly. And on the Atlanta side, you can come back with Drake London, who's pretty underpriced at this point. Let's see. Yeah, Drake London's only 5.7K, under 6K. Crazy. Or you can come back with Kyle Pitts, 3,600. You can come back with both of them. You can come back with Bijan, 8,200. But of course, we know the ceiling with Bijan. He's got a very big ceiling, and I think this is a very nice spot for him as well. So I do like to stack that game as well. And that's going to be it, guys. That is your week 4 preview. Those are guys I'm on. What do you like? What do you dislike about the show? What do you agree with, disagree with? Please do hit me on Twitter at datadrivenoms, at datadrivenoms on Twitter. Or, leave a comment on the YouTube video. Let me know what your thoughts are. I know, I've got some work to do to get this up to snuff in terms of production value and everything like that. And I'm doing my best, I promise. But, yeah, hopefully I'm 100% health next week. That's my main focus right now. Being healthy probably will help me be better at this whole thing. I've had to stop several times. I'm going to edit this, so you're not going to know. But, yeah, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Please do leave me a review. Let me know how you like it. Until next time, go get that money.